All right. Right now, it's time for us to get inside of the big story of the morning. So the Trump administration has introduced a program offering undocumented migrants $1,000 and paid travel to leave the United States voluntarily. The Department of Homeland Security claims that this program will reduce deportation costs by around 70%. Participants may be given a path to legally return to the U.S. if they're deemed good people. Good people in inverted commas. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're joined by a social and political commentator and a very strong and powerful voice from within the Jamaican diaspora, Dr. Karren Dunkley, who is my very special guest at this time. Good morning, Dr. Dunkley, and how are you today?
Doing quite well, Grand Rising to you and your listeners. Thank you, as always, for having me.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much, Doc. Now, what was your first thought when you heard of this new offer that came out recently from the Trump administration?
I'm definitely not surprised. When I heard of the new offer from the Trump administration, I was not surprised for several reasons if you understand the historical context of immigration reform within recent years. So, for example, in 2012, when Mitt Romney, who is also a Republican, ran for office, he too had echoed a similar policy of self-deportation, except at that time, the idea was not widely accepted. And in fact, he was criticized, and ultimately his proposal became politically damaging, but not surprised. But in terms of political messaging, they see it as offering a cash incentive so that deportation is reframed as a choice rather than coercion. So I was not surprised at all. This has been a sentiment, an idea that has continued to permeate and percolate in the Republican Party.
Have you been able to hear responses coming from persons who might be impacted by this offer?
I do know that there is that in the embassy of Jamaica and across some Caribbean countries, when Trump came into, once he won the election, President Trump, they did say that they did see an increase, a sharp increase in the number of individuals who were asking what is the process for them to voluntarily deport back to their countries. The reason is this: you would see in the news media how they're treated. In fact, I had the opportunity to speak to some Jamaicans at an event held by the Family Unification Resettlement Initiative led by Carmita Alvarez. Mm-hmm. She had a Reconnect Day in Jamaica. I was just there. And when they describe how dehumanizing it was for them to return to Jamaica in the United States, being held in shackles, being treated just in horrible conditions, you could see why many persons would choose this option. You may also note, Richie, you and your listeners, that the president has signed several deals, for example, with El Salvador to hold prisoners, even those who are nonviolent, in what we call despicable conditions. So the policy implication is that for undocumented individuals without criminal records or those who are pending asylum, that definitely they would want to voluntarily return themselves.
Mm-hmm. So, Doc, do you believe that the administration, in fact, can achieve the goal of deporting over 1 million migrants annually with this program? Is the cash incentive likely to spur more participation?
I think we're at a wait and see. We know that, for example, at 1 million at 1,000 persons, you're really at 1 billion. And what they do is that, my understanding from the men, I didn't have a chance to speak to any women who were involuntarily returned. That's a new phrase. Carmita says she doesn't like the term deportees. Involuntary return is that they charter a flight, and the flight went to several cities along the Northeast corridor for this particular charter flight. They went to Pennsylvania, Virginia, Jersey, and they picked up these individuals slated for along the way. So people may not want to risk the dehumanization, and they may, quite frankly, wish to return on their own terms, especially those who, for many reasons, decided that they would remain or would be undocumented. So it commodifies displacement. So there are many, it's really complex why people migrate. Some are fleeing violence. Some are seeking asylum for different reasons. Some, quite frankly, were looking for better opportunities and decided that this would be a way for them. So it remains a wait and see. But we know that many persons will prefer to involuntary return and not risk being caught up in the system. Here is the catch. You might recall that a part of this proposal says that people can come back if they, in other words, supposedly it's offering them a legal pathway to return. And no one really knows if this will pan out. So many immigration advocates, they view it as performative and they see it as dehumanizing and not certain that it will gain any traction in Congress or survive legal scrutiny without a full immigration reform package.
There's another side to the equation that I'd like to bring in the mix in our conversation, and that is the long-term consequences of a program like this on the U.S. economy, on the labor market, and overall immigration policy. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. So you may see the videos on social media with individuals, especially those who are farmers, sharing that they have no labor, right? So we know, for example, that immigrant labor continues to be one of the main sources for agriculture, construction, hospitality, elder care, and food services. So undocumented immigrants play a crucial role in these industries. So you absolutely we'll see labor market disruptions. We're seeing those disruptions right now. We see that we understand that mass voluntary departures could certainly lead to severe labor shortages. And then we have to think of what will this portend for driving up wages in the short term, but also it will inevitably increase cost for employers. And of course, Richie B, us as consumers. And then let's talk a little bit about productivity, especially in sectors that already struggle to attract domestic workers for physically demanding low-wage jobs. So I think these are the three spaces in terms of labor market disruptions. The industries that are crucial, the mass voluntary departures in terms of driving up wages, and productivity decline where we're struggling. And then we also have to think of what is the long term. You talk about inflationary pressure. As labor costs rise, prices will rise for food, housing, construction, and personal care services. You would recall that inflation was a key issue in the last presidential election. And certainly this is going to exacerbate inflation, particularly in regions heavily reliant on immigrant labor. Something that I must share with you, because it is incumbent upon me to say this to your listeners. You have individuals such as myself. We pay enormous taxes. So let us think about the tax revenue loss. Piece that is rarely shared is that many of these immigrants who are undocumented, they pay taxes because they do pay taxes through Social Security, Medicare, and sales taxes annually, even though they don't benefit because these taxes are paid through payroll deductions. And so that, of course, is going to lead to some tax revenue loss.
Seems like that is less of a concern of the administration in all of this immigration matter. To the best of your knowledge, Doc, has a similar policy ever been attempted before? And if so, do you know what the results were like?
We have never seen a similar policy attempted in the U.S. What we do know is that in let me correct that. Because let me place it in context in terms. We have seen policies where they have had similar voluntary departure in the past. So, for example, in 1954, they had Operation Wetback, and this was not technically voluntary. It was militarized, but this happened under the Eisenhower administration to remove Mexican laborers. In 1980s and the 1990s, we had voluntary departure for those in legal proceedings. So U.S. immigration law would allow some non-citizens to leave voluntarily instead of being formally deported. 10-year re-entry ban. As you may know, that there is a 10-year re-entry ban when you have been involuntary return for many reasons, but there was no financial incentive. In 2008, we know that ICE also had what they call Operation Scheduled Departure, and this was a precedent to Trump's idea. So it offered no cash, but it encouraged, I think the numbers were about 450,000 undocumented immigrants with final orders of removal to turn themselves in. But only 8 persons participated. And it failed because people, of course, were fearful. They had a lack of trust in ICE and the fact that they have deep family roots in the United States. In fact, I met a gentleman at the event I spoke to you about, Richie B, and he was in anguish, and he shared with me that he left Jamaica from he was 2 years old. He had no connection, no cultural connection. And he said something, and it really pained my heart. It's a story I've been sharing with my circle. He said, I really want to go home because he doesn't have that love and attachment that we have to Jamaica. And I said to him, but this is home and Jamaica is so amazing, And it was just such you could tell he was psychologically and emotionally displaced. And finally, in recent years, in 2017 to 2021, the Trump administration had a deterrence by design. Again, they didn't offer money, but what they did do is that they wanted to ensure they coerced people through family separation and the public charge rule not to come to the U.S. So this is the first time that we've seen an explicit direct financial offer that it's encouraging people to self-deport rather than to be forced.
Finally, whenever I see these kinds of things being discussed, offers being made, especially as it relates to immigration, the first thing that comes to mind is the impact it will have on families. How are these policies likely to affect families, Doc, especially those with mixed immigration statuses, those with, say, children born in the United States of America? Do you think there's enough consideration for that aspect of these arrangements?
I do not believe, well, certainly these policies are not intended to consider the deep destabilizing impacts that it will have on families with mixed immigration status, where some family members are U.S. citizens, such as those children who are born, or lawful residents, while others are undocumented. In fact, remember that there is also another proposal, a corollary proposal, you could call it, where children who are born to adults or individuals who do not have status would no longer qualify for U.S. citizenship. So let's talk about that another time. But table. So clearly we have to talk about family separation and trauma. We know that parents may leave children while they remain, especially if the children are U.S. citizens. We know there's emotional trauma. I heard in one school district, this parent really shared with the older sibling, and the older sibling went to school and was sharing with the guidance counselor and had to get counseling what to do in case ICE came and picked them up and how to care for the younger sibling. So these are real conversations. These are real happenings. So we know that the long-term psychological effects related to loss, fear, and instability are real. We know that there might be pressure to leave as a unit. Some families may feel forced to self-deport together. even if some of the members have a legal status or path to citizenship. And certainly it's going to result in a loss of talent, community investment, and potential future contributions. Let me tell you about the economic displacement, just two final points, where the undocumented parents are often the primary earners in their households. I know the men I met at the FURI, the Family Unification Resettlement Initiative, Richie B, they shared that they have their retirement plans in the U.S. They have their house in the U.S. Another gentleman I told you said his younger children, these are young children, are here. And so we know that the economic displacement, it could plunge the entire family into, even if they stay in the U.S., because these parents and individuals are the primary earners in their households. And then just what are the effects on services and rights, right? So we know now that some families, when ICE first started the raids, children were absent from hospitals and they would no longer seek legal assistance out of fear of being identified and pressure to leave. One gentleman told me the story. He said that he went in, they told him to come in. Year after year, they would sign for him to stay. When he went in this time, they separated him and his lawyer, and they locked him up, and that was it. And he came home in the clothes that he was wearing at the time. He came in from New York because he turned in himself thinking that it was just a routine check and visit. So obviously, it's going to have, as I stated earlier, direct, unprecedented, deep, destabilizing effects.
Yes. I wanted to have made that my final question, but let me ask you, what would you leave with someone who is out there now contemplating whether or not they should take up this offer or remain in hiding, so to speak? What would you say to such an individual?
So such a complex question, Richie B, because if someone is seriously considering to take up this offer of this proposed 1,000 to self-deport, it is crucial for them to really come to that decision with themselves and their families. And I would recommend that they have, quite frankly, because we have actually communicated this at what we're calling a departure dossier to protect themselves and their loved ones, especially, to your point, if they're part of a mixed family status. So they need to ensure that they have legal documents. Again, some of the gentlemen I spoke to, they have to leave individuals to be their power of attorney, to manage their finances, to make legal decisions with their assets here. If you have young children, how do you make such a decision to leave them behind? You have to clear up your guardianship documents and your immigration case records, because if this supposedly will offer a legal path back. So someone who has to make the decision, it has to be thoughtful, it's real, it's emotional, and they have to really put in place a departure dossier, legal documents, financial arrangements, banking information, their will and testament. What is the plan for their final paycheck with benefits if they have that? If is that they're not going back, if they're non-criminals. And then they have to have identity and documentation copies. Some of them come back to Jamaica, they have no ID. And so Carmita and the Ministry of Labor was sharing with them how to get identification, birth certificates, passport. In Jamaica, they're TRN. So they have to have all of that, their medical records. That's another big piece. You have some individuals coming back who have long-term diseases. I'm not going to mention any for the fear of the stigma of some of these diseases, but they have to be managed. And so therefore, what does that mean? So again, this is a decision. It's a sober moment in U.S. history. It's a sober moment for individuals, but they have to make the decision thinking in quite practical terms, legally, financially. And again, about re-entry, what will their life when they re-enter into Jamaica look like in terms of housing, job, family connection? What is going to be the transfer socially for them? How will they enroll or reintegrate into future programs?
How will they survive? I want to thank you so very, very much, Dr. Karren Dunkley, for your thoughts and for your time this morning. As usual, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. We look forward to the next opportunity. Have a great day today.
Thank you so much, Richard B., to you and your listeners.
All right. That's Dr. Karren Dunkley, a social and political commentator and a very strong and powerful voice within the Jamaican diaspora. And this morning we looked at the Trump administration's introduction of a program offering undocumented migrants $1,000 and paid travel to leave the U.S. voluntarily. What are your thoughts on this matter? Let us hear from you. Of course, you can reach me in the chat room at www.richiebradio.com. You can call me or message me on 876-861-4753, or you can also reach me toll-free on 877-255-3086. That was the big story.